going up pretty good. What a mess this is. Welcome back to another episode of Fishbowltales. This week, I'm going to be trying to get the lower radiator pipe completely finished. Now, I've already worked on this a little bit in the previous weeks, and I had a ton of issues with it. For one, I figured out that my bead roller cannot do steel tube. Works perfectly fine on aluminum, but with the steel tube, it actually started to flex the dies around and do all kinds of weird stuff, and it was a total train wreck, and I had no luck with it. The second thing is that the flange on the inlet of the water pump, where the tube goes into it that actually connects everything together, it was brazed on with like silicon bronze rod, and I thought I had it all ground out of there, and I didn't. So when I went to take everything together, it just turned into a disaster, just a disgusting mess of incompatible filler rods, and yeah, it was a train wreck. So this week I'm gonna make a flange out of aluminum to replace that flange, and we're just gonna do the whole thing from the radiator all the way to the inlet of the water pump out of aluminum. I have enough material on hand to get it all done, so let's get started. So as far as parts and pieces go, this is what we're working with this week. This guy here is a combination lower alternator bracket, belt tensioner, and pass-through for the inlet of the water pump. Now the flange originally bolted up right here, and that allowed our lower radiator tube to connect up to the inlet of the water pump. Ultimately, I would love to just eliminate this piece completely, but since we have other brackets incorporated into it, I'm just going to go ahead and use it and redesign the flange out of aluminum. This here is a piece of 1/2 inch thick 6061 aluminum. We're going to build a flange in this exact same pattern so that we can connect up our lower radiator pipe. Alright, so I've got our piece of rough stock in the vise on the mill. I'm going to go ahead and take a face cut on both sides of the material with this great big 2-flute end mill. Believe it or not, a guy that owns a mill doesn't own a fly cutter, but this will do just fine for what we're doing. Okay, so now that we've got the part laid out on the material, I've got it back in the mill. I'm going to go ahead and pop the big hole in it right now. I'm doing this kind of the hokey way with a hole saw versus using a boring head, but I just want to show you guys that you don't really need fancy machinery to do any of the kind of stuff that I'm doing. You could just as easily do this with a hand drill and a hole saw. It's just going to take a little bit longer. So here is the finished product. The inside hole is a little bit rough. That's kind of just the nature of using a hole saw as opposed to a good precision tool. I did most of it off camera just because it was going to take me all day to set up and shoot every single operation. Once I had all the holes drilled in it, I went ahead and rough cut it on the bandsaw, and then I laid out the radii of all of the bolts on the outside there and the transition in between the big hole and the small holes. Cut everything out the rest of the way on the bandsaw and then finished it on the belt sander. I'm really happy with the way it fits on there, I mean, that's just about following all of the factory lines in there where the old flange was. So now I'm going to go ahead and fit the tube in it and get it welded up. Here's what the finished flange looks like mocked up on the engine. Now all I have to do is put a piece of tube in there, rotate it to the right angle so I can know exactly where I need to index it to weld it, put a mark on it, take it all back apart, and get it welded up. Okie dokie, I like that. Check it out, folks. We're almost finished with this project. Got the 90 welded on there. That was a little bit difficult because the radius on the bottom of this tube is so tight to the flange I couldn't actually get underneath there to weld it, so I welded it from the inside and then just went around the outside as far as I could. All I have left to do now is bring this lower tube up 90 degrees like that. I need to weld this 90 into it, connect the two up, and we are finally finished. As promised, here is the finished bottom tube with both ends bead rolled. There's the 90 back up to the water pump. Bead roll on the end there. It's time to install it. Strong, still has some flex in it, so everything has some room to move around. I'm really happy with that. Well, folks, that wraps up the cooling system on this bus. I know it's been a really long time coming. If you've been following along with me, you know that I started on this project back in November of last year. That was when I started machining the hub for the hydraulic cooling fan. Now, obviously there are still some parts and pieces that need to go into this system, but those can wait for a later date. I've got a couple of temperature sensor bungs that need to go in the upper tube, maybe mounting brackets and things like that. But that is it. For the most part, the bulk of this project is complete. And we've run through a lot of different sections. And we've done a lot of different things. It started out with the hub for the fan motor. I mounted the radiator. I built the fan bracket, built the radiator shroud, built the ducting, and then built the upper and lower coolant pipes. So it's been a huge undertaking, and it has taken a really long time. But I am so happy to be finished with it. That means that next week we can move on to something different. And I think that's going to be our charge pipes for the intake system. I need to mount the intercooler, I need to mount some fans on the intercooler, and I need to plumb everything back to the engine. So stay tuned for next week's episode where we start on that. Thank you guys so much for watching. If you haven't already, be sure to click the thumbs up and subscribe to the channel, and I'll see you guys in the next one.